Hiya, my name is John P. I'm a member from Three Voices.
I'm Michael. I'm also a member of Three Voices. Three Voices are expert by experience committed to speaking out about the realities of detention in the UK.
Right. Today we're going to be looking at the Home Affairs Selected Committee, Immigration, Detention, featuring Caroline Knox.
The immigration minister.
The immigration,
Wow.
so the so-called immigration minister.
Wow. So today we're also we're collaborating with This Was Must Fall. Just a quick word that we have already seen this video, and as you're going to be watching this, you're going to be seeing our direct, raw reactions to some of the issues that are affecting on average 27,000 people in the detention system. As Three Voices, all our members has been affected by this. So you will see our raw reactions to some of the difficult things that we have to face with.
Welcome, Immigration Minister, Permanent Secretary, Mr. Ind. We are very grateful for your time. We obviously want to cover a whole series of issues around immigration detention. All of those people being really under pressure, they've got to get it up to 230, 250 per week. The check in the system to prevent people basically wrongly being pushed through the system in order to meet the target. What's the check?
Well, there are several. I mean, the first one I've got to say, just in terms of my staff, they absolutely understand the importance of operating the immigration system with humanity. I promise this committee, my people are extremely motivated by that. They want to approach, they know how serious this role is, they know how important it is to approach it with humanity. That in themselves, being decent professional people, is a very big check on some of the possible incentives you describe. Secondly,
It's going to be the first thing here to start. I think he doesn't understand the definition of humane, because I have been a victim of being detained 3 times in my life as an adult, and I have been in 2 different detention centres, and I can tell you there is nothing humane about an immigration centre and the policy behind it.
Minister, in the last 6 years, are you aware of any wrongful cases of deportation or detention by the Home Office going wider than the Windrush scandal?
One of those cases being wrongly detained 3 times. So yeah, there have been cases of people being wrongly detained, and I'm one of those, and I know hundreds of people that have been wrongfully detained.
Have there been wrongful deportations or detentions by your department in the last 6 years?
So I've been in the department 1 year, and I'm not an expert on the immigration system. However, Mr. Ind might therefore want to add to my answer. I would expect this.
Isn't that interesting? He's not an expert on the immigration system. So why is he employed to advise on immigration policy and advise ministers on immigration?
Someone with no idea.
This is the problem. The problem is you have people who have a disconnected view about what is actually going on. And these are the people that the government listen to when it comes to making policy. You have not just the expert by experience who are clearly non-existent in any of the inquiries that take place. The big question is, why are they trying so hard to bring in so-called experts who have no experience or understanding of the issues, but they're trying so hard to not engage with expert by experience and those who are at the forefront of the issues that we're talking about?
I don't know.
So, since we can't get answers from you as Permanent Secretary, Mr. Ind, can you explain, have there been wrongful deportations or detentions from your department in the last 6 years? Yes or no?
yes.
Have there been more cases of wrongful deportations on top of those 2 cases?
There have been times when we have brought individuals back very shortly after we've
How many?
I'm thinking of a handful.
A handful. How do we enumerate a handful?
5, up to
5,
5.
10, 20.
So you're asking me over a period about the last 4 or 5 years?
6 years.
Well, I'm saying a handful.
So we're talking tens of thousands of people's lives ruined every year.
Absolutely.
And they're talking about, oh yeah,
Money.
harmful and yeah, this amount of money. It's pure nonsense.
We've also had evidence that victims of rape and gender-based violence, such as being routinely detained and often for significant periods. Again, how can you see that as an appropriate method of enforcing immigration rules?
When we receive a Rule 35 report, we have to consider it in a timely manner, but we also have to consider it in light of the immigration history and the likelihood of securing a removal of that individual. We can only detain people where there is a reasonable possibility of removal within
It's just bullshit, isn't it? It's just utterly bullshit. Detaining people in the last resort is crazy. In our group, our members of our group altogether, we have lost more than 20 years
Yes.
on immigration detention. It is just despicable how disproportionate they use detention as a first resort, not the last resort, as the first resort. Because there are so many ways, so many alternatives to manage an individual before applying the detention policy. It's just bullshit.
I think we can do better. I absolutely think that we have to look at people as individuals, and I think that the review of the detention centre rules that's coming later this year will help. Of course, I'm deeply troubled by some of the cases I've seen, but actually I'm always deeply troubled by any victim of torture, any woman that is vulnerable, any man.
She's chatting rubbish.
Why later this year?
No. Listen to her earlier tone of voice, the way she doesn't care. As long as you're illegal to her, you're illegal. She doesn't give a
Lack of empathy. It's a lack of empathy.
Now, I will give anybody the credit, the doubt. I'll give anybody the abuse or whatever. What I want is what she's saying now. Who's gonna hold her accountable to her words right now? That's what's important. Because words don't mean anything. She can say whatever she wants. Tomorrow she can do the opposite.
Absolutely right.
So if a person, if we have a minister coming up with this kind of language, then we need to be able to hold her accountable to her words.
You've got 10,000 people who were detained for more than 28 days last year. So there's a lot of people being detained, and it's clear that a lot of them are not about to be imminently deported. So if we go through some of the cases that we've been given, you have a case of somebody who attempted suicide, obviously highly vulnerable, Rule 35 report carried out. He's under constant watch at Morton Hall because of the considerable concern about his mental health. And the Home Office response to the report was to maintain his detention and to respond, and I quote, this is from their report, the report says that you are the origin of this decline, and the increased isolation that you feel is an unintended consequence of your current behaviour. So the Home Office removal team were blaming the detainee for his mental state because, well, it was his fault that he was.
This is shocking.
So I was a peer supporter and a listener in detention centre, both at Morton Hall and at Brook House, and this is the culture of abuse. This is a culture that needs to change. The culture of disbelief. Unfortunately, when you put targets on people, you're gonna get this because the fundamental thing is to remove people. It's not to care for people.
Okay, Yvonne Smith, in her 60s, daughter of a Windrush generation, has been caring for her father, who came over as part of the Windrush generation, who is in his 90s. Now, it's reported that she's been detained in Yarlswood for 9 months. Was there evidence that she was at risk of absconding? How could she be detained for 9?
How do you detain a 60-year-old woman in the first place? And then to hold her for 9 months.
Speaking, there is no word.
Now,
And as Yvette Cooper said, what is she going to abscond?
This is our unhumane treatment that we get that people might not understand.
Are you surprised?
Right? Because if this lady, 60-year-old lady, was a white woman, white British, being held in even some countries' prison for 5 days.
They'll be doing something about it. The whole foreign office will be involved.
In months. She's a woman in her 60s.
Any cases involving Windrush generation and their children are obviously hugely regrettable, and the Home Office is very sorry for them, and sorry that we have kept people on detention when clearly in cases like Mrs. Fish we should not have done.
But even if this wasn't a Windrush case, this is a woman in her 60s who's caring for her father in his 90s, and she's been detained in Yarlswood for 9 months. It is baffling as to how this woman could end up being detained in the first place.
Yes, of course they do, and I'm sure Mr. In can provide some stats on that if you would like.
I can. I mean, I think the cases you outlined, Chair, they're not easy for any of us to listen to. I think we all have the same reaction to you. I think they are not in all cases necessarily the whole picture that is available to my teams, which, as you know,
Wait a second, and I'll put this to you. When you were in detention, how many people were over the age of 50 did you see in detention?
I saw few. I saw even people, a gentleman who was around 70s, really frail, that every time I see that gentleman, my heart breaks into pieces.
referred to some of them at least as having a criminal past. It does illustrate the really difficult job that my teams have to do, the really difficult decisions they have to make on a daily basis. The formulation which the Minister outlines, being a reasonable prospect of removal with in a realistic timescale. The word imminent doesn't feature in any of that, so a realistic prospect of removal within a reasonable timescale. Case law has shown that in determining what is a reasonable timescale, you can take it.
And this is the type of language they're using there, that neuro-linguistic. He's trying to convince the public, reasonable, realistic, reasonable, realistic. In less than 30 seconds, he mentioned those words 5 times. He's trying to justify something really hard that is not realistic and is not reasonable. Because when someone is in detention center for 9 months and you cannot deport them, there's no reasonable time for being deported. So he shouldn't be detained in the first place. And realistic, what is realistic? Harry Potter is realistic for me. So, and that's what they keep bashing about, and we allowing that to happen, the minister allowing that to happen. And that's the thing, guys, cut it out. What is realistic? What is reasonable? Let's gonna call it a number, a figure, and then from there we can move on. So that's the first thing that they should start doing.
The public harm that may be occurred if an individual with a criminal past is released, as well as their previous history of absconding. So it is very much case specific, and they are very difficult judgments, but as you present them and as they're presented to you, they are very difficult reading for sure.
Yeah, we've got loads of them, and that's the problem. We have loads and loads and loads. Paulette Wilson in her 60s, why was she being detained? We have cases of Jess Phillips' constituent who rang the police because of a threat from a violent ex, and she was taken to Yarlswood instead. We had twins from Lithuania who've been trafficked. Everybody knows and agrees they've been trafficked because they gave evidence against their traffickers in court, and that was what led to the first cases of the stronger modern slavery powers being used and their traffickers being deported. They get a conditional discharge due to allegations of theft from a library, and then they're given a removal note and threatened with being locked up, and it's only when they kind of come up with a legal challenge that then the case is sorted out. We've got a blind detainee at risk of self-harm, detained for over a year. A wheelchair user who tried to set himself on fire, held for 15 months, month after month after month. And that is what's so shocking about these cases. There's so many of them.
Some of them have a very significant backstory, which is available to us, which is hard to share, which means that our case...
Bullshit. They have back cases or stories or whatever. I'm sorry. If these back cases don't mean nothing, it's just something that they want to hold on to say, oh, these people are dangerous, this is why we can't release them back into the community. What are the back cases? If somebody's in a wheelchair right? If somebody's in a wheelchair and 50 years old, 60-year-old, frail, what danger
It can be.
do they?
But I mean, Michael, hang on. Before we go any further here, there is something called the penal system that is the institution that deal with someone who, when committed a crime,
Right.
not when pre-committing a crime. Okay, this is no that film with Tom Cruise.
Mhm.
Okay, so what they do is undermining the penal
Justice
system, saying that because you presume to be a danger for society, so we should lock you up. That is unfair, and that again makes me believe there is a there is a word for that. Discriminating crime. A crime for the British person and a crime for a non-British person, it will have different effect.
Oh, that we already know.
And we, as we are not British citizens, so we are double penalized.
Right. But the question is, and I think you made a very good point, that what they're doing is they're trying to punish people on an assumption that they might offend.
Yeah.
This doesn't make any sense.
Of course not.
You can't punish somebody on an assumption.
It's another way of racism. It's the color of your skin what they are scared of.
So 35% of those in immigration detention are foreign national offenders.
35% of those in
Immigration detention.
immigration detention are foreign national offenders,
Yeah.
and what proportion of those are high harm offenders?
I think that depends on your definition of high harm.
The Minister said use the phrase. What's your definition of high harm, and how many of them are there?
So I am conscious that in the very small number of cases where we might have an immigration offender in detention for over a year, they are exclusively foreign national offenders with a range of very serious offences, including kidnap, murder.
Bollocks! I'm sorry, but I stopped you there, so you've been holding your tongue for long. Please go ahead.
No, you go for it because you had it there. You had it there in the chamber. Come on, go for it.
It's absolutely bollocks, right? The question was, how many foreign ex-offenders, or as they would say, foreign national offenders,
35%.
right? It's a 35%. And then they went on about this high end. The high end, the way she justified the high end was the fact that if a person has spent over a year sentence, then they are
serious criminal.
I was using somebody's ID to work.
Yeah, you're a serious
I'm
criminal.
a serious criminal.
You're a bad man.
That I received 20 months in prison. That's well over a year,
Yeah.
right? But I was held under immigration control powers for 2.5 years, well exceeding the time that the criminal justice imposed on me. So by their definition, and this is the thing about the use of language and the use of interpretation of things. So I remember I recently had a chat with an MP, and when you mention foreign nationals or ex-foreign national offenders, she was under the impression that these were drug dealers and people with gun culture and people with knifing people. She had no idea that this could mean somebody stealing a T-shirt from the shop,
or anyone just as you said, using an ID in order to survive,
which is the case for most people.
I mean, what if really portrays in here is the IPP in 2012 was abolished. Yes, but for British citizen, not for non-British citizen, they still apply indefinite incarcerated for public protection for people like me and you, Michael.
Absolutely.
And I mean, their policy, and they are happily admitting it.
The law doesn't protect anybody else apart from white British citizens.
Huh? It's discrimination.
Minister, you said earlier people are only detained when there is a realistic prospect of removal. Is that true?
Yeah, and that's what the detention gatekeeper is there for.
And how does that tarry with what the former Home Secretary wrote to the Prime Minister in a letter in January that said that she's instructed immigration enforcement to renew its focus on removability in order that beds are not being blocked by illegal immigrants that we have no realistic hope of removing from the country?
So I think it's important that we focus on making sure that we're using detention appropriately. I can't answer for the former Home Secretary, but I am very conscious that the gatekeepers must consider what the likelihood of removal is, how quickly that might happen, and 63% will have left detention within 28 days.
But you are satisfied that that letter is inaccurate and that we do not detain people unless there is a realistic prospect of removal?
As I said, I'm not going to answer for the former Home Secretary, but I think it is important.
You can't
That
answer.
she was saying we should remove people that we're locking up where there's no realistic prospect of removal, and you're saying we don't do that.
Well, 92% are out within 4 months, 63% within 28 days. Those who are detained for a long...
She's saying 4 months, like, hey, it's nothing, mate. It's only 4 months of your life.
But this is the thing.
It's like, it's nothing.
You're right, but I would campaign that she spends 4 months in Yazwood. And then she can come and say that she'll have the
4
credibility.
months. How many
to
days?
come out
How
and
many
say
days?
that.
There, 28. Wait, 36. 120 days.
120 days, yeah.
And she's saying it so lightly. That's disrespectful. 4 months. There are people that that they get caught shoplifting and they only get 28 days in prison.
Look, the reason that we have carried on asking these questions is because it does feel like, frankly, the system is in a real mess. And look, we haven't even started asking you about immigration to exit processes now. So for it to be in such a mess before we even get to the new programme of work does feel deeply worrying. And, we all have the long-standing words echoing in our ears about whether or not the Home Office is fit for purpose. I think that both in terms of officials and ministers, you have an awful lot of work to do to prove up to us that it is. Thank you very much. Order.
Whoa.
What a waste of time, isn't it? Complete bullshit, isn't it?
Well, glad that's over. On to the next
The
one.
proceeding
Which
has
I'm
ended.
sure
It's gonna be simple in the next 3 months.
Well, I think there will be, but I won't hold my breath. All right.